Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a scalpel to, well, probably the most complex piece of chronological machinery in prophetic literature, the Book of Revelation.
It certainly feels that way sometimes.
Right. And we're moving beyond the broad strokes, the cosmic battles and beasts, and focusing on a single kind of administrative deadline that seems to determine the entire sequence of final judgments.
That's a good way to put it, an administrative deadline.
Yeah, the central high-stakes question our sources are really wrestling with is this. When exactly does the sealing of the 144,000 conclude, in the sequence of the seals and the trumpets?
It's a classic puzzle of sequencing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the stakes, well, they couldn't really be higher from a theological standpoint. This moment, the completion, the sealing of the last of the 144,000, it acts as a kind of theological trigger.
Your trigger? How so?
Well, until that last person is sealed, the final, arguably most devastating phase of divine judgment seems to be held in check. We're looking at this interlude, this pause, really, in the narrative flow between the 6 and 7 seals.
Ah, the pause in Revelation 7.
Exactly. And we're trying to figure out precisely how long that pause is meant to last. Does it end quickly, or does it stretch out?
So our mission today, for you listening, is to guide you through 4 distinct theological pathways. These are drawn from our sources, and they're all trying to reconcile the timing of this really crucial event.
And it's not just about counting heads, like you said. It's about character, it's about chronology, and ultimately, it's about the consequences that flow from that timing.
Okay, so before we dive into the 4 views, we need to lay some groundwork. There are some premises, some assumptions from the source material that we just have to accept for this discussion.
Right, essential starting points. We've got 3 key ones. First, there's the assumption, and it is an assumption in some circles, but core to these sources, that the 144,000 mentioned in Revelation chapter 7, the ones being sealed, are the exact same group as the 144,000 we see later in Revelation chapter 14.
Right.
The one standing with the Lamb on Mount Zion, those redeemed from among humanity, the first ripe fruits.
Okay, same group. Got it. What's the second premise?
The second one is crucial for focus. Our scope is extremely narrow here. We are looking only at the moment the last member of this very specific group, the 144,000, is sealed.
So we're not talking about the general sealing believers get, like the Holy Spirit being a down payment.
Exactly. We're explicitly setting that aside, that idea from Ephesians or Romans about the first fruits of the Spirit. And we're also, importantly, ignoring the separate question of when the full number of martyred witnesses under the altar is filled. That's a different timeline marker.
Okay, laser focus. Just the 144,000 sealing completion.
It's like a surgical strike, as you put it, on the administrative completion of this specific group.
And the third premise.
Context. Where does this sealing event actually happen in the narrative? The action kicks off with the breaking of the 6th seal.
And that's not subtle.
Not at all. This is major cosmic chaos. Revelation describes a massive earthquake, the sun turning black like sackcloth, the moon turning blood red, stars falling from the sky. It's global, undeniable upheaval.
Total terror. The passage says everyone, from kings to slaves, is hiding in caves, begging the mountains to fall on them to hide them from God's wrath. It's the great day of his wrath has come, and who can stand?
Exactly. But right there, at that peak of ultimate fear and cosmic breakdown, the narrative timeline just stalls. It pauses.
Right before the 7th seal is opened.
Yes, precisely. Before that final seal can unleash the next phase, we get this dramatic interlude in Revelation 7. And what happens? 4 angels appear, holding back the 4 winds.
Holding them back from harming the earth, the sea, or the trees?
Until, and this is the key word, until the servants of God identified right there as the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel are sealed on their foreheads.
So that interlude, that pause, gives us our absolute deadline, doesn't it? The sealing must finish before those winds are let go.
Precisely. It gives us our terminus ad quem. A bit of jargon, but useful.
Let's break that down quickly. Terminus ad quem, that just means the absolute latest point something can happen, right? The end point.
That's it exactly. The sealing has to be complete before whatever destructive force those 4 winds represent is unleashed. And the entire debate we're looking at today, across all 4 of these theological views, really boils down to interpreting when those 4 winds are finally released and what exactly they're holding back. That's the crux of it.
Okay, so that brings us straight to the core tension, doesn't it? The intellectual linchpin that the whole timeline seems to pivot on.
It really is.
The sources present these 2 fundamentally opposing ways to understand who these angels are. You've got the 4 angels holding the 4 winds in Revelation 7, and then later, Much later, it seems, at the sixth trumpet in Revelation 9, you have 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates.
Right, Revelation 9.1415.
So the massive question is, are these 2 sets of angels, these 2 destructive forces, the same group? Or are they totally different entities doing different things?
And honestly, this interpretive choice, it dictates everything that follows. It determines whether the 144,000 have just a few moments, maybe hours or days, to be sealed during that interlude, or potentially, months or even years.
Wow. Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's start with hypothesis A. This is the view held by views 2 and 3 that we'll get into later. What's the core idea here?
Hypothesis A says, yes, the 4 winds are the Euphrates angels. They are one and the same force.
Okay. If they are the same, what's the main argument for that? Where does that idea come from?
The argument really relies heavily on looking outside Revelation 7 itself. It draws a strong analogy, primarily from the book of Daniel, specifically Daniel 7, verse 2.
What happens in Daniel 7.2?
Well, Daniel has this vision where he sees the 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea, and what happens immediately after the winds stir the sea.
4 great beasts emerge from the water.
Exactly. 4 beasts representing kingdoms or political powers. So for the people who hold hypothesis A, this establishes what the winds symbolize. They aren't just about literal wind or ecological damage. They are intrinsically linked to chaos, yes, but specifically the chaos that leads to the rise of adversarial political power, ultimately the beast system of Revelation.
Okay, so the winds aren't literal. They're symbolic of the forces that bring the Antichrist or the beast power onto the world stage.
That's the core of the argument. And if that's true, then the land, sea, and trees that the winds are restrained from harming in Revelation 7, they can't be literal either.
They have to be symbolic, too. Representing what?
Representing the realm from which the beast arises. The political sphere, the nations, maybe religious structures, the earth dwellers. The symbolic earth and sea that the beast comes from.
So under hypothesis A, the restraint isn't about stopping literal ecological damage. It's about holding back the final oppressive political system.
Precisely. Holding it back until the 144,000 are fully prepared, sealed, ready for that conflict. Now think about when the Euphrates angels are actually released.
That's at the sixth trumpet, Revelation 9.
Right. And their release leads to massive global catastrophe, a third of mankind killed, and it happens just before the beast seems to fully rise to power in the following chapters. So the logic follows. If the 4 winds cause the beast to rise, and the Euphrates angels are released just before the beast rises,
then they must be the same force released at trumpet 6.
That's the conclusion of hypothesis A.
Okay, so what does accepting hypothesis A do to the timing of the sealing?
It creates a potentially massive elongation of the timeline for the sealing.
Right.
Think about it. The truly destructive power, the winds Euphrates angels that bring the beast, they're held back all the way until the 6th trumpet sounds.
Right.
But the 7th seal is open before the trumpets even start. And the first 5 trumpet judgments all happen before the 6th trumpet.
So the sealing could still be happening during those first 5 trumpets.
Theoretically, yes. According to hypothesis A, the sealing of the 144,000 could continue after the 7th seal is opened, and right through the initial trumpet judgments, the hail and fire, the poison waters, the darkness, even the locust plague of the 5th trumpet. Because the ultimate destructive power, the beast-raising power, is still being restrained at the Euphrates until trumpet 6.
Wow. Okay, that dramatically changes the picture from a brief pause to potentially a very long period.
It does.
But wait, if we go with hypothesis A, doesn't that make the whole interlude scene in chapter 7 feel a bit weird? You have this absolute cosmic terror, everyone hiding in caves, panic everywhere, and then this dramatic pause to seal people before the winds blow. If those winds aren't actually going to blow until potentially years later at the 6th trumpet, why this super urgent, immediate interlude right after the 6th seal catastrophe? The timing feels off.
That is definitely a key challenge, a structural awkwardness for hypothesis A. Proponents would argue, well, the urgency is because the preparation for that final conflict, the securing of God's key servants, must begin immediately after the signs of the 6th seal appear. It shows God's priority. He secures his people first, even if the final judgment is delayed.
So the interlude signals the start of the sealing, but not necessarily its immediate completion.
Something like that. Or that the imminent threat is perceived, even if the actual release is later. But you're right, structurally, it feels like a very, very long pause between the setup in chapter 7 and the payoff in chapter 9, if they're the same angels. It does stretch credulity for some.
Okay, let's flip the coin then. Let's look at hypothesis B. This one informs views 1 and 4. What's the premise here?
Hypothesis B says, No, the four winds in Revelation 7 are not the same as the four angels bound at the Euphrates in Revelation 9. They are distinct forces with distinct functions.
So if they're different, how does this view interpret the four winds?
Here, the interpretation snaps back toward the literal, and as a consequence, the timeline snaps shut very quickly.
Mm-mm.
If the four winds are not the specific mechanism for the beast's rise via the Euphrates angels, then they must represent something else. The most straightforward reading is that they represent the generalized initial judgments of God that directly harm the physical earth, sea, and trees.
Okay, so under hypothesis B, when Revelation 7 says the angels are holding back the winds from harming the earth, sea, and trees, it means the actual physical globe, the plants, the oceans, the ground itself.
Precisely. The literal ecosystem.
Yeah.
Now, if that's what they're holding back, we have to look very carefully at what happens immediately after the seventh seal is finally opened and the trumpet judgments begin.
Right, Revelation chapter 8.
What happens at the very first trumpet?
Hail and fire mixed with blood are thrown to the earth, and it burns up 1/3 of the earth, 1/3 of the trees, and all the green grass.
Exactly. And the second trumpet, a burning mountain thrown into the sea, turning 1/3 of the sea to blood, killing 1/3 of sea creatures, destroying 1/3 of ships. The third trumpet poisons 1/3 of the rivers and springs.
Okay, yeah. That's immediate, undeniable physical harm to the earth, the sea, and the trees, starting right away with trumpet number 1.
So think logically now. If the specific job of the four winds in chapter 7 was to hold back harm from the literal earth, sea, and trees,
And that literal harm starts immediately when the first trumpet blows.
then the four winds must have been released. Their job of restraining was over. They must have been let go either right when the first trumpet sounded or maybe just moments before it.
So the restraint had to be lifted. And because the text explicitly says the restraint on the four winds can only be lifted after the 144,000 are sealed,
Exactly.
then the entire sealing process must be completed during that short interlude. That pause after the sixth seal horrors, but before the seventh seal is opened and the first trumpet blows. There's no other time for it.
That is the logical necessity baked into hypothesis B. If the four winds hold back literal physical destruction, and literal physical destruction starts at trumpet 1, the sealing has to be finished during that chapter 7 interlude. It's a very tight window.
So the core disagreement between hypothesis A and B really comes down to this. Are the early trumpet judgments 1 through 5, let's say, part of the destruction that the four winds were holding back?
That's it, exactly. Hypothesis B says, yes, absolutely, look at trumpet 1. Hypothesis A has to say, no, the winds were holding back something different, something political. That doesn't happen until trumpet 6. That's the fundamental split that leads to the four different views on the timing.
Okay, now that we've got our heads around those two big underlying hypotheses, winds Euphrates or winds at Euphrates, let's dive into the four specific viewpoints our sources lay out. Because they each try to use the different events later in Revelation to kind of back up their preferred timing for the sealing.
All right, let's start with view 1. View 1 tries to find a bit of a middle ground, maybe, though it leans much more towards hypothesis B, the different angels idea. It argues that, okay, maybe the sealing wasn't instantly complete before the seventh seal opened, but there's another hard deadline that forces its completion: the events of the fifth trumpet.
The fifth trumpet, that's the really nasty one, right? The famous 5 months of torment.
That's the one, where the fallen star, often interpreted as Satan, is given the key to the abyss, the bottomless pit. He opens it up, and out come these, well, locust-like creatures, but described like scorpions with human faces and crowns. Horrifying stuff.
And they inflict this terrible pain, like a scorpion sting, for 5 months. But what's the crucial instruction given to these locusts? It's in Revelation 9, verse 4.
Yes, and this is the absolute bedrock for view 1. The command given to the locust leader, Abaddon or Apollyon, is crystal clear. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree interesting echo of the four winds restraint, perhaps, but only those people who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads.
Only harm the unsealed. That's a direct operational command.
Extremely direct. So the argument for view 1 is simple. If these locusts, these demonic tormentors, can successfully differentiate between the sealed and the unsealed, well, that implies there must be a clear, fixed, administrative line already drawn between those two groups. The categories must be set.
And if the categories are set, if the line is fixed.
Then the sealing process must be finished before that fifth trumpet sounds and the abyss opens. Otherwise, how could the locusts possibly obey the command? It would be functionally impossible if people were still being added to the sealed list day by day during the 5 months.
Yeah, that makes sense. If the sealing was still ongoing, the command would be inherently ambiguous, wouldn't it? Who's the target today? What about the guy who gets sealed tomorrow? Does he get tormented today?
Exactly. It raises all sorts of difficult questions. And central to this view is the idea that the seal provides total protection from this specific judgment. If the whole point of the seal in this context is exemption from the locust torment,
Then suffering the torment for a few days or weeks and then getting sealed seems to kind of invalidate the seal's protective purpose for that plague, right?
it certainly seems to undermine it. So the conclusion of view 1 feels pretty robust based on that verse. The sealing must be complete, done and dusted, before the abyss opens and the fifth trumpet plague begins.
Okay, but do the sources raise any challenges to view 1 anyway around that seemingly clear command in 9.4?
They do present this sort of conversational counter-argument, the challenge that tries to poke a hole in view 1's rigidity. The question raised is, could the command be interpreted slightly differently? Could it mean something like, harm only those who are currently unsealed at any given moment?
Implying the group of unsealed might shrink over the 5 months as more get sealed.
Potentially. But this immediately leads to that really uncomfortable follow-up question we touched on. If the sealing is dynamic and ongoing during the fifth trumpet, would those people who get sealed, say, halfway through the 5 months, would they have already suffered weeks or months of that horrific scorpion-like torment before they received their protective seal?
And if they did suffer first?
Then the seal isn't a mark of total exemption from the start of that specific judgment, is it? It only protects them from the remainder of it. Proponents of view 1 would strongly reject this. They'd argue the 144,000, being God's special first fruits, must be protected from the very beginning of that plague, which absolutely necessitates the finality of the sealing before the abyss is ever opened.
Okay, that clarifies view 1. Now let's move on to views 2 and 3. You said earlier these both accept hypothesis A.
That's right. Both view 2 and view 3 operate under the assumption that the 4 winds of Revelation 7 are the same as the 4 angels bound at the Euphrates in Revelation 9.
And accepting that premise automatically gives the 144,000 more time to be sealed, right? Because the ultimate restraint, the Euphrates angels, isn't released until the 6th trumpet.
Exactly. It pushes the final deadline much later in the sequence. So how does view 2 use this extra time? What's their proposed timeline?
They argue that, yes, the early trumpets 1 through 5 are definitely severe judgments. You've got ecological damage, darkness, the locust torment. But they argue these do not involve the complete release of the destructive power represented by the 4 winds Euphrates angels.
How do they distinguish them?
They interpret those first 4 trumpets, which mostly cause ecological harm, as sort of preliminary warnings, necessary judgments, but distinct from the final, globally catastrophic political destruction linked to the Euphrates angels and the rise of the beast.
Okay.
Since the ultimate beast-raising power held by the winds angels is not released at the 5th trumpet, only the locusts from the abyss are, they take this as evidence that the sealing must still be in progress. The final restraint is still holding. So in the framework of view 2, where does the sealing actually finish?
It continues during the 5th trumpet. It carries on throughout those 5 months of torment caused by the locusts. The sealing process finally concludes sometime after the 5th trumpet plague ends, but before the 6th trumpet sounds.
And then the 6th trumpet blows, releases the Euphrates angels, causes the death of a third of mankind, and that signals that the 144,000 must have just been completed.
That's the sequence according to view 2.
Now, what's fascinating here, and you alluded to this, what our sources really highlight as the major hurdle for view 2 is the prioritization, isn't it?
Absolutely. View 2 seems to completely prioritize, sticking to the analogy, 4 winds, Euphrates angels, hypothesis A, over dealing with the explicit, seemingly unmistakable instruction given to the locusts at the 5th trumpet.
Yeah, that verse again, Revelation 9.4, it seems like the killer argument against view 2. If the sealing is still happening during the 5 months of the 5th trumpet plague, how on earth can the locusts possibly obey the command to harm only the unsealed?
It really presents a significant logical contradiction, doesn't it? To make view 2 work, proponents have to find a way around that verse. They might have to argue for some kind of maybe retroactive protection, or perhaps that the seal of God represents an internal character quality that the locusts can somehow recognize, even if the external administrative mark hasn't been applied yet.
That feels like a stretch, though. The text says the seal of God on their foreheads.
It does. That emphasis on the forehead strongly suggests a visible, or at least clearly demarcated, sign or status. not just an internal quality. It makes the ongoing sealing during the locust plague argument quite weak when you confront it directly with the practical need for the locusts to differentiate their targets immediately.
So view 2 basically has to kind of downplay or reinterpret Revelation 9.4 quite heavily to maintain its timeline based on hypothesis A.
It seems to force view 2 into a very difficult defensive posture against what looks like a plain reading of the text regarding the locust's targets.
Okay, so if view 2 stretches the timeline into the fifth trumpet, where does view 3 take us?
You said it also holds to hypothesis A, wins Euphrates angels.
It does. And view 3 takes hypothesis A and stretches it to its absolute maximum limit. Honestly, the sources suggest this results in the most logically strained, even contradictory timeline of all four.
So where does view 3 place the final deadline for the sealing?
Get this. They argue the sealing isn't completed until during the chaos unleashed by the sixth trumpet itself.
During the sixth trumpet,
Yeah.
while the Euphrates angels are active.
Yes. The proposed sequence goes something like this. Sixth trumpet sounds right Uro. The four angels bound at the Euphrates are released right Uro. Their massive army kills 1/3 of humanity. And concurrently, while this mass death is happening, the sealing of the last of the 144,000 is finally completed. Just moments before the beast fully emerges onto the scene, which follows the sixth trumpet events. Wow. Okay, that feels problematic. Based on the constraints we've already talked about, that seems logically untenable, right? You're asking us to accept not just one, but two pretty major inversions of the timeline's internal logic.
Exactly. It runs into serious trouble on two fronts. First, the fifth trumpet locust problem we just discussed with view 2, it still applies here, but it's even worse.
How so?
If the sealing is ongoing all the way until the sixth trumpet, it means the entire 5-month period of the fifth trumpet torment happened, while many of the eventual 144,000 were still unsealed, and therefore presumably vulnerable. This completely contradicts the idea that the seal provides protection from that specific plague.
Right. It makes the protective aspect seem almost meaningless for those sealed late. What's the second major problem?
The second one goes right back to the original constraint in Revelation 7, the whole reason for the interlude in the first place. Remember, the four winds are explicitly restrained until the servants of God are sealed.
Yeah, the sealing must be complete before the winds blow.
But view 3 argues that the sealing finishes during the time that the Euphrates angels, who, according to their premise, hypothesis A, are the four winds are already released and actively causing the death of 1/3 of mankind.
So the destruction caused by the winds starts before the sealing is finished.
Logically, yes. It completely inverts the stated sequence and purpose from Revelation 7. The text says, hold the winds until sealing is done. View 3 has the winds blowing while the sealing is finishing. The reason the winds were restrained in the first place, the safety of the 144,000 during their sealing, is completely undermined if the destruction begins before they are all secured.
How does anyone possibly defend that inversion? Is there any textual evidence they use to try and override the clear statement in chapter 7?
It's difficult to see strong textual support. Defenders might have to resort to quite complex interpretive moves. For example, they might argue that the sealing, mentioned in chapter 7, refers to something different than the final completion. Or maybe it's a different group being sealed there, but that directly contradicts the core premise our sources started with, that the 144,000 in chapter 7 and 14 are the same group.
So it forces them to break one of the foundational assumptions.
Or, alternatively, they might try to separate the metaphysical restraint on the winds from the actual physical act of sealing the last person, perhaps arguing the restraint was lifted based on God's foreknowledge moments before the final mark was applied. It gets very speculative.
It sounds like it.
And critically, our sources pretty clearly label view 3 as the weakest, most problematic argument of the four, precisely because it seems to sacrifice basic chronological consistency and the explicit statements of the text in order to maintain hypothesis A and stretch the timeline as far as possible.
Okay, so views 2 and 3, based on winds, Euphrates angels, seem to run into some significant textual and logical hurdles, especially view 3. This brings us back around to view 4, which you said aligns with hypothesis B.
That's right. View 4 goes back to the premise that the four winds in Revelation 7 are different from the four angels bound at the Euphrates in Revelation 9.
And if they're different forces,
Then view 4 represents the most restrictive, the most chronologically tight interpretation of the sealing deadline. It argues that the entire process of sealing all 144,000 is completed during that brief, solemn pause the interlude we talked about that occurs between the cosmic chaos of the sixth seal and the actual opening of the seventh seal.
So everything happens right there in Revelation 7, verses 1 through 8.
Essentially, yes. The sealing is finished before Revelation 8 even begins.
And this aligns perfectly with the idea that the four winds were holding back literal physical harm, right?
Exactly. Because according to View 4, once the sealing is complete during that interlude, the constraint on the four winds is immediately lifted. Then, the seventh seal can be opened, which happens at the start of Rev 8. And what follows immediately? The sequence of the trumpets begins, starting with the first trumpet.
Which brings immediate physical harm to the earth, sea, and trees, the very things the winds were holding back.
Precisely. The sequence becomes remarkably straightforward and logically consistent. Sixth seal catastrophe, right harrow sealing interlude, Rev 7. Sealing completed, right harrow constraint on winds lifted. Right harrow opened, Rev harrow, right harrow, sound right harrow. Physical destruction begins, first trumpet onwards.
And under this view, what happens to the Euphrates angels? They're still bound.
Yes. According to View 4, the Euphrates angels, who are responsible for the much later, massive one-third of mankind killed event at the sixth trumpet, remain bound for a long time. They stay bound throughout the entire period of the first 5 trumpet judgments.
Why? Because they represent a different kind of destructive force.
Exactly. They're seen as representing a distinct phase of judgment, perhaps more focused on humanity directly, or linked to political systems and demonic warfare leading to the beast's reign, rather than the more generalized ecological damage seen in the first few trumpets, which are attributed to the release of the four winds.
I have to say, the logical rigor of View 4 is appealing. It seems to resolve that tension between the four winds restraint in Chapter 7 and the immediate harm of the first trumpet in Chapter 8. Quite seamlessly.
It does offer a very clean administrative cutoff.
And it fully respects the protective purpose of the sealing interlude. The work has to be done before the next phase of judgment starts. It posits the sealing as an absolute required administrative prerequisite. The judgment sequence can't proceed until God's special servants are secured.
That's the strength of View 4. The moment the seventh seal is opened, the focus shifts entirely to judgment being poured out because the prerequisite, the sealing, has been met. That silence in heaven for about half an hour, just before the trumpets. View 4 would see that as the final, dramatic, deep breath held before the storm begins. A storm that could only begin because the 144,000 were now safe and sealed. #4. Connecting the sealing to the atonement and the little book. View 4 elaborated.
Okay, so View 4 offers this really tight, clean, chronological solution by separating the winds and the Euphrates angels and finishing the sealing right after the sixth seal. But doesn't that create other problems later in the book? How does View 4 handle the bigger picture stuff, like the theological purpose, maybe connecting it to the Day of Atonement, or explaining why certain related scenes appear much later in Revelation?
Yes. You're right. While View 4 solves the immediate timing puzzle around Revelation 7 and 8, it does force us to think differently about the narrative structure of Revelation as a whole. And this is where we shift a bit from just the when of the sealing to the why. What does the completion of the 144,000 actually signify theologically?
And the sources connect this to the Day of Atonement.
Strongly. Remember, the 144,000 are described as the first fruits to God and the Lamb, specifically in Revelation 14. View 4 interprets them as the last group of these first fruits needed before a major shift in heavenly activity. Their completion isn't just ticking a box, it's a profound theological marker. It signals that the preparation for the ultimate cosmic Day of Atonement, the high priest's final climactic function in the heavenly sanctuary, is now ready to commence.
Okay, remind us the Day of Atonement in the Old Testament sanctuary service. What was its significance?
It was the most solemn day of the year, Yom Kippur. It was the one day the high priest went beyond the veil into the most holy place. His job was to cleanse the sanctuary itself from all the sins that had been symbolically transferred there throughout the year for the people's daily sacrifices. It represented final reckoning and purification.
And the source material specifically points to Leviticus 16.
Yes, Leviticus 16, verse 12. It describes the high priest taking a censer full of burning coals from the altar and his hands full of sweet incense, bringing it inside the veil. The cloud of incense was crucial. It covered the mercy seat, the place of God's presence, allowing the priest to minister without being consumed.
So the incense offering was essential for the atonement ritual to even begin.
Absolutely essential. Now, connect that to Revelation. According to View 4's timeline, the 144,000 are sealed before the seventh seal. What happens immediately after the seventh seal is opened in Revelation 8, verses 3 through 5.
There's that half hour of silence, and An angel comes to the golden altar in heaven with a golden censer and is given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Much incense offered on the golden altar before the throne. The source material argues this isn't coincidental. This offering of incense happening right after the seventh seal is opened, which View 4 says only happens after the 144K are sealed, is the direct heavenly parallel to the high priest starting the Day of Atonement preparations.
So the sealing of the 144,000, achieving this final group of perfected first fruits, is the necessary prerequisite that allows the high priest Jesus to begin his final atonement work, the preparatory phase involving this incense offering.
That's the connection View 4 makes. It sets the stage for the final cleansing of sin from the universe, starting with the heavenly sanctuary itself.
Okay, so if the sealing signals the preparation for the atonement starting right after the seventh seal, does that mean the actual final cleansing happens quickly?
No. That's an important distinction the sources make, particularly within View 4. The preparation begins with the incense offering at the start of the trumpets. But the actual final atonement, the ultimate cleansing of creation from sin, and the final judgment, that's linked to events much later. Specifically, it's often tied to the first resurrection.
Which happens at the seventh trumpet, right, the last trump.
Exactly. According to this view, the full number of martyrs, those under the altar back in the fifth seal, who were told to wait they need to be gathered in during the beast's reign, that final period of persecution. Only when that number is complete, coincided with the seventh trumpet, can the actual final cleansing and resurrection occur. But the sealing of the 144,000 is what starts the clock on that final phase of heavenly intercession and judgment preparation much earlier, right after the sixth seal. #tag the role of the 144,000 to final prophecy.
This is getting deep. Let's try to pin down some of these other terms the sources connect specifically to the 144,000, especially within the framework of View 4, where they are sealed early. They're linked to the two witnesses, the everlasting gospel, something called the little book, the sealing itself, obviously, and also the latter rain. That's a lot of symbolic weight.
It is, and it really emphasizes that this group isn't just about a number, it's about their character and their function. They are seen in these sources as having achieved the absolute highest standard of spiritual maturity. They embody that really difficult command from the Sermon on the Mount, selfless love, even for your enemies, perfection of character.
And how is that character achieved? What's the latter rain?
The latter rain is interpreted, based on Old Testament prophecies like Joel 2, as a special, final, incredibly intense outpouring of the Holy Spirit. It's not the initial gift of the Spirit, the early rain that starts the church, but a late, powerful infusion meant specifically to ripen the harvest, to perfect the character of the final generation of believers right before the end-time judgments fall. The 144,000 are seen as the primary recipients and exemplars of this latter rain experience.
Okay, and the everlasting gospel. Usually we think of the gospel as, salvation through faith in Jesus. Is it something different here?
It's presented as more specific in this final apocalyptic context. While it certainly includes salvation, the everlasting gospel preached right before the final judgment, like in Revelation 14 by the angel flying mid-heaven, is defined by the source material as the final urgent message calling for obedience to God's commandments, warning against worshiping the beast, proclaiming the hour of God's judgment has come. It's heavily focused on the specific truths and warnings outlined in the book of Revelation itself.
Especially concerning that final 1 week or 7-year period.
Exactly. It's the final test message for the world. And the sealing of the 144,000 is seen as the divine confirmation, the stamp of approval, that they have fully internalized this everlasting gospel, achieved the character needed, and are now empowered by the latter rain to perfectly manifest and proclaim this message globally, even under extreme pressure.
Okay, but this brings us right back to that structural puzzle for View 4. If the sealing, which you're now linking to achieving character, receiving the latter rain, understanding the everlasting gospel, if all that is completed way back during the interlude after the sixth seal, why does the narrative scene where John, who often represents the prophets or witnesses, eats the little book only appear much, much later in the story? It's in Revelation 10, after the sixth trumpet has already sounded. That book is often equated with the sealing message or the everlasting gospel. The events seem dramatically out of sequence if View 4 is right about the early sealing.
You've hit the nail on the head. That's the major structural challenge View 4 has to address. And the solution offered by the source material relies heavily on understanding a key literary feature of Revelation, the use of recapitulation or repetitive narrative.
Recapitulation, meaning the book repeats itself.
In a way, yes. It doesn't just move in a straight chronological line. John often cycles back, describing the same time period or the same core event from a different perspective, adding more detail or emphasizing different aspects each time. Think of the seals, trumpets, and bowls. They seem to cover overlapping periods of judgment, but with escalating intensity and different focuses.
Okay, so how does this idea of repetition help View 4 resolve the timing issue with the little book in Revelation 10?
The argument goes like this. The sixth seal interlude, Revelation 7, describes the internal, administrative, and character-based completion of the 144,000. They are sealed. They spiritually eat the little book in the sense that they receive the full download, the complete understanding and empowering experience of the everlasting gospel, enabled by the latter rain. It happens internally to them.
So chapter 7 is about them receiving the character and the message internally, secured and prepared.
Exactly. Then, much later, the sixth trumpet scene, Revelation 10, where John, representing the prophetic remnant, perhaps the two witnesses embodying the 144K message, is visibly given the little book by the mighty angel, told to eat it, and then commanded to prophesy again before many peoples. This scene is interpreted as a repetition, or rather a depiction of the commissioning for their public ministry.
So chapter 7 is the internal sealing and preparation. Chapter 10 is the external commissioning and the start of their main public work.
That's the argument. View 4 maintains its clean administrative cutoff for the sealing itself. It must end before the seventh seal first trumpet. But it uses the principle of recapitulation to explain why the narrative depiction of their active mission starting appears later, timed specifically to coincide with the major escalation happening at the sixth trumpet, namely the rise of the beast's power.
So the sealing is finished early, allowing the trumpet judgments to begin. But the 144,000's most intense, public, confrontational prophecy only kicks off later, at the sixth trumpet, as described in Revelation 10 and 11, with the two witnesses.
Precisely. It separates the timing of the completion of the sealing, securing the group, ending the restraint on the winds, from the timing of the start of their most powerful public prophecy, confronting the beast. What are they doing between the first and sixth trumpets, then? According to this view, the sealed 144,000 are likely already teaching, perhaps more quietly, spreading the understanding of Revelation, preparing people. But when the sixth trumpet sounds, the Euphrates is loosed, the beast emerges. That's when their ministry shifts into high gear. They become the powerful, visible two witnesses of Revelation 11, clothed in sackcloth but capable of calling down plagues and fire on their enemies for that specific 1,260-day period.
Okay, that layered approach, using recapitulation, does seem to allow View 4 to maintain its early sealing deadline while still accounting for the later narrative elements like the little book and the two witnesses ministry. Right? We've established the core debate around the four winds versus the Euphrates angels, and we've seen how View 4 uses an early sealing deadline and recapitulation to build its timeline. Now, let's try to synchronize those really destructive judgments, the fifth and sixth trumpets, with the bigger picture, the escalating evil that the sources talk about. How do they link Satan's own activity to these specific trumpet sounds?
Yeah, looking at the synchronization reveals this interesting interplay, this mechanism of divine permission overlaid onto escalating demonic agency. It's not just random chaos, there's a permitted sequence. The source material, particularly following View 4's logic, links the fifth trumpet directly to a major event involving Satan himself.
Not just the locusts, but Satan's own status changing.
Exactly. They connect the fifth trumpet to that dramatic war in heaven, scene described in Revelation 12, where Michael and his angels fight the dragon, Satan and his angels. Satan loses and is cast out, thrown down to the earth.
And Revelation 12 says, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath."
Precisely. And then you look at the start of the fifth trumpet in Revelation 9, verse 1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit, the abyss.
So that falling star is interpreted as Satan cast down from heaven.
That's a very common interpretation, yes. He's given the key, he opens the abyss, and unleashes the locust plague, those scorpion-like tormentors. This is seen as the first major escalation of organized demonic power being unleashed directly onto humanity on Earth, happening right after Satan's confined here. It's preparatory, setting the stage for the beast who will soon follow.
And the goal of this plague seems to be torment, psychological and physical pain, not outright death. And importantly, it's explicitly restricted to only harming those without the seal of God.
Correct. That restriction is key. Satan's activity here, releasing this plague, is clearly happening within divinely permitted boundaries. It serves a purpose in the sequence, perhaps hardening hearts or testing allegiances, before the next far more lethal phase begins.
Okay, so the fifth trumpet is Satan cast down, opening the abyss, unleashing torment on the unsealed. Then we hit the sixth trumpet. This is where the real restraint seems to come off, leading to that massive global catastrophe.
Yes, the sixth trumpet is a major step up in destruction. The command is given, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, and their release directly results in the death of 1/3 of mankind by an immense army, often described as 200 million horsemen.
This is the point where those restrained forces, whether View 4 sees them as distinct demonic legions or perhaps symbolizing vast geopolitical powers mobilized for war, are finally unleashed.
Exactly. The source material following View 4 might suggest this release of the Euphrates angels could even be seen as Satan, now operating on Earth, being permitted to mobilize his own vast forces, maybe human armies, maybe demonic powers, maybe both, represented by those 200 million horsemen mentioned right after the angels are loosed. This is the maximal event of human destruction described before the beast fully establishes his global reign.
And structurally, how does View 4 use that image of the mighty angel in Revelation 10, the one standing on the sea and the land, to frame this timeline?
The mighty angel of Revelation 10 is absolutely crucial for View 4's synchronization. Remember, this imposing figure appears after the sixth trumpet sounds, but seemingly before the full impact of the beast's rise. He stands with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land.
Which are often the symbolic realms from which the two beasts of Revelation 13 arise, right? The sea beast and the land beast.
Precisely. So the angel standing astride both realms during the period leading up to the sixth trumpet, i.e. during trumpets 1 through 5, can be interpreted, within View 4, as representing a powerful divine restraint. He's holding the boundaries, preventing the full premature emergence of the beast system, even while the earlier trumpet judgments are falling.
Okay, so the angel is kind of standing guard, keeping the ultimate evil in check while the initial judgments unfold. But then, when the sixth trumpet sounds,
the situation changes. The command is given to loose the Euphrates angels. In this framework, the mighty angel must, in some sense, step aside or lift that specific restraint he was imposing. The destructive forces bound at the Euphrates are released, leading to the mass death of 1/3 of mankind, and now the path is clear for the beast to emerge onto the world stage in Revelation 13. The timing is tightly synchronized by divine permission.
so it's like a sequence. Sixth trumpet sounds, right arrow. Mighty angel lifts restraint, right arrow, 1/3 killed to right arrow, white. 1/3 killed, right arrow, beast emerges.
That's the sequence View 4 proposes. And the source material keeps emphasizing that even this horrific escalation is operating within permitted boundaries. While heavenly angels might execute the direct command, loose the four angels, it could be argued that it's ultimately Satan who executes the destruction and orchestrates the rise of the beast, but only within the limits God allows. Think of Jobia. Satan needed permission to afflict him.
Right, Job 1.11 to 12, or even Revelation 17.17, where God puts it into the hearts of the kings to give their power to the beast, fulfilling his purpose.
Exactly. It's this synchronization of the end of a certain kind of protection or restraint, the start of a more severe phase of judgment, and the simultaneous climax of evil's permitted agency. The trumpet sounds, the angel steps aside, the Euphrates forces are unleashed, mass death occurs, the beast emerges, and right at that same hinge moment, according to View 4's use of recapitulation, the sealed 144,000, represented now perhaps by the two witnesses, begin their intense public 1,260-day prophetic testimony against that newly emerged beast power. It all clicks together at the sixth trumpet.
It really is incredible when you lay it out like that. The entire structure, the whole flow of judgment and prophecy seems to rely so heavily on this one initial interpretive choice. Are the Revelation 7 angels the same as the Revelation 9 angels? One set of angels doing two jobs, or two sets of angels doing two different jobs at different times?
It really does seem to be the linchpin. It forces you, the reader, the listener, the theologian, to decide which piece of evidence carries more weight. Is it the symbolic analogy to Daniel 7 suggesting the winds are political forces released late, hypothesis A leading to views 2 and 3? Or is it the seemingly unambiguous command given to the locusts in Revelation 9.4 and the clear physical harm starting right at trumpet 1, hypothesis B leading to views 1 and 4? Where you land on that question really shapes your entire understanding of the apocalyptic timeline presented in Revelation. #TagJexisMoskai.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. Let's review the key takeaways from this pretty intense deep dive. The absolute core of the whole thing, the disagreement across these four viewpoints about when the 144,000 are sealed, it really hinges on two critical interpretive choices, doesn't it?
It really does boil down to those two. First, you have to decide on the nature of the land and sea mentioned back in Revelation 7 when the winds are being held back. Is that the actual physical planet Earth, its ecosystems?
Which, if it is, strongly supports a very tight early timeline for the sealing, like View 4 suggests.
Exactly. Or is land and sea used symbolically there, representing the realm of nations, politics, maybe the earth dwellers from which the beast arises?
Which, if it's symbolic, allows for a much longer timeline, pushing the release of those winds, now seen as political forces, much later, maybe to the sixth trumpet, like Views 2 and 3 argue.
That's the first big choice. And the second, which is obviously related, is the identity of the destructive forces themselves. Are the generalized four winds, held back in chapter 7, associated perhaps with initial physical harm, the exact same entities as the catastrophic four angels bound at the Euphrates, released in chapter 9, associated with mass death and the beast's rise?
Hypothesis A says yes, they're the same. Hypothesis B says no, they're different.
And your answer dictates the possible timelines. Views 1 and 4, leaning heavily on hypothesis B, different angels, and specific textual evidence like the locust command in Rev 9.4 or the immediate harm of trumpet 1, they demand the sealing ends relatively quickly. View 1 says before the fifth trumpet. View 4, the most stringent, says it must be complete even before the seventh seal is opened.
Right. Whereas Views 2 and 3, they really commit to hypothesis A, same angels, which allows the sealing to potentially continue through the early trumpet judgments. But, as we saw, they really struggle to logically explain that locust command in Revelation 9.4. That singular verse seems to be the biggest stumbling block for any view that tries to stretch the sealing process past the moment the abyss is opened.
It's a major hurdle for them. But stepping back from the specific timing debates for a moment, there is a unifying link, isn't there? Regardless of exactly when you place that final administrative mark on the last forehead, the theological consequence seems consistent across the sources. The sealing of this specific group, the 144,000 first fruits, is directly tied to major shifts in the heavenly realm. It signals the onset of the final phase of the everlasting gospel being proclaimed with ultimate clarity and power, and it marks the beginning of the preparation for the great day of atonement, the final reckoning of the heavenly sanctuary. It's a crucial moment of divine administration and perhaps character confirmation.
And that brings us back to the description of who these 144,000 are. Not just a number, but people who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, who have no lie found in their mouths, who seem to embody that ideal of selfless love, even as the sources emphasize love for their enemies, which raises our final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Does the sealing truly represent merely a timeline completion? Is it just about God finishing an administrative head count, ticking a box so the next domino in the judgment sequence can fall?
Or could it be something deeper? Is the seal fundamentally the divine stamp, the final confirmation of their perfected character? Is it God acknowledging their proven ability to perfectly manifest the truths of the everlasting gospel, to live that life of complete selflessness, even under immense pressure?
And if the sealing is primarily character-based, then maybe the timeline isn't defined just by reaching a specific number, but by the quality, the spiritual maturity of these crucial witnesses being finally confirmed by God. And that perfected character then becomes the key that unlocks the final phase of judgment and redemption. It shifts the focus a bit, doesn't it? From purely mathematical prophecy to the ultimate importance of moral and spiritual perfection in God's final act.
Definitely something for you to ponder as you continue to explore these complex, interwoven prophetic timelines.